So yeah, first of all, thank you so much everyone for finding time, and especially Yogesh and Suman. It's a pleasure to have you as part of the panel today. And I've been reading a lot about you and your work recently, and there are a lot of questions, and. But before we dive into that, we just finished watching India Untouched, which was almost 2 hour long. I won't call it a film, but a journey through exploring realities across India, where it's across India, it's across different religions and different spaces. And for someone who has spent a good amount of time living and probably still continuing to live in India, it's it's very relatable. Um, is there something that you Suman and Yogesh, Suman, I know you've watched this film before. Yogesh, I'm not sure, but if you have, like, is there something you want to share about how you feel about the movie? What are the moments that stay with you? Or
Uh, I watched this movie, I think some 7, 8 years ago, and for me it was not shocking. Like, I mean, uh, I saw, like, things which was there in the movie. So I saw in bits and pieces, and like, maybe it's not like I never traveled to different parts of the country 7 years ago, like, but so and that India and touch is like, there are stories from across India and different linguistic states and all, but when it comes to the caste untouchability especially. So but like, things are more and more or less same. So but I but a lot of people, when they see this movie, they reduce caste to only untouchability. So the caste system is not only about untouchability. It's a most cruelest practice in the caste system, and it is a part of it. But caste system is something like, it's a world of cruel practices in itself. So lot of like, the movie, like, I watched it. I mean, as a movie, I watched it for the first time, and like, obviously we don't see such movies in India, or the filmmakers who make such movies. So yeah, I mean, it's important for the outsiders, or people who don't are not people who don't know about the other side of India, right? So like, for me, like, before movie, I witness all these things through text, to living through life, and like, it's a part of everyday, even now. So yeah, but it is interesting for the people when outside, when they see it, and they're like, okay, like, is this also in India, right? I mean, so that actually, I mean, okay, in that sense, the movie is important, I guess.
thank you for sharing, Yogesh. Suman, is there something you would like to say about it?
I think I agree with what Yogesh is saying. It wasn't shocking for me because the places that I've grown up in and the things that it's like an everyday reality. So it wasn't shocking. Uh, Heartbreaking, yes, but I wouldn't say it was shocking. Um, I feel like a lot of people who have watched this film and then I've had a discussion with, when they express how shocked they were to see this, and then when they say that, oh, we didn't know that this still happens, that is more shocking for me. That kind of surprises me when people say that, and I'm like, really, like, that kind of makes me realize that how different the world that we see, how different it is for people who belong to the community, people from marginalized communities, and people who, let's say, have the privilege of not experiencing something like that. So it's almost like a contrast, a two different world that we experience. So it's always really surprising when people come up and say that, oh, I watched that movie and it's very shocking, and I'm like, oh, really? Like that? It's good. It's good. It's a good thing that you have watched it and you uh, understood a little bit of what we have experienced throughout our lives. But I would have been, I think, more. I mean, not happier, but I think I would have been more happier if people would watch this movie and say that, yeah, this actually happens and we already knew about it. So just having that awareness about what exactly caste is, what exactly caste atrocity is, and not reducing it to just brutal form of atrocities, but recognizing the smaller um, instances of caste-based violence and atrocities in your everyday life. I think that would be something that I wish that people would understand more.
I think that is, I can really relate with what you're saying, Suman and Yogesh both. Like when I saw this movie, it suddenly reminded me of a lot of moments in my life, and I could recognize them. You know, suddenly the awareness kind of increases. So it's definitely, like you. I won't call it shocking, but I would call it realizing the subtle ways in which it exists in the system, and not just, you know, uh, the brutal or more starking ways. You know, so is there, so how we want to proceed is, you know, I have a lot of questions for both of you, as I said, and I want to dive into that, but I also understand that everyone has seen this movie and they might have something to say, or you know, just express. Is there anyone who wants to speak a bit about it before we go into the Q&A?
Uh, Suman, you want to say something about it?
I think I already like spoke about the movie a little bit. Maybe anyone who has just seen the movie.
Yeah.
So basically, like you watched a movie. It was a screening, and it was out and out India Untouched. It was about how untouchability is practiced. But let us say movie as an example, like for like every movie in India has a cast in it, like so it is about like how you watch it and how you decode it, right? So every movie has a cast, like even the most popular movie like Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge also has a cast, how it works, how brutal it is, how patriarchal it is, how brahmanical it is. It has. And name any movie which is shot outside India about Indians, it has a cast. The only thing is how you decode that. So that is why I said that caste system is not only about untouchability. So like these are the okay, like untouchability is the most cruelest form. Like it's the most cruelest manifestation of how people live caste norms. But like it can be a good introduction, but to understand how caste work, we need to be like it is not that like I see somebody and his skin is white, so he's a white person, he's a black person, he may be Asian or something. So caste is not something which is apparent. Caste, to identify the caste, is it is a matter of cognition. Like your you can smell the caste, okay, you can taste the caste. So uh, you need to understand how, if caste operation is there, you need to be available there or present with all your senses, you know. So I mean that is that is caste. So that is why like this movie can be a good introduction for people. But like, and also the problem is that uh, like in India, we read about racism. Like we have a literature, not in abundance, but we have something by which we can understand racism. Like we have novels, like just for an example, like there are so many black writers from so many African countries also. But let us say like in a popular domain, like we have Toni Morrison, we have like James Baldwin. For us to you know uh, to speak about racism and what it is in historical and even in the present context. But for an outsider, for the European world or for the American world or for the Western world, there is no substantial popular literature by which they can understand caste in everyday language. there is no text, and there are not such movies, which can talk about out and out talk about these issues. So I guess, I mean, this is a good trigger for the discussion, but we need to understand that, like whatever we do, we live, we see how we interact and all. Caste is there, so that is how we can, you know, um, eh, be engaged with the question of caste.
I can share my experience if it's open for others to share thoughts.
Yeah, for sure. We if sure, can I request that we do this for a few minutes, and after that we'll start the Q&A, and in the end we'll again have space to dive into more open conversation. So please go ahead, Siddharth.
Yeah, thank you so much. I agree with what Yogesh is saying, and I think we need to look at our audience as two separate things. This movie can work for two different audiences. For India, they see it, and our question should be, and you don't think this happens? Exactly the surprise that we should show towards Indians. But having been in America for the last 17, 18 years now, I have used India Untouched exclusively for all my presentations under No Real India banner. And by no, I mean get to learn about real India. I use this movie as a starter. I take bits and pieces depending on my crowd. If I'm talking to college students, I pick the college student in JNU section. If I'm talking to a high school kids or middle school kids, I pick the first 2 minutes. That's the very powerful. Of course, that's why Stalin put it as the first 2 minutes, where the kid finally ends up asking, ye caste kya hota hai? Basically, what is this caste? So I use this. So it's very useful to actually break down the romanticized version of India that upper castes have narrated to Americans. So India Untouched, to my knowledge, after 13 years of its release, is the best movie to show to Americans or any other Westerners. And I do that to this day. So audience-wise, Indian audience should be more able to see subtle things like Yogesh was saying in Dilwale Dulhania Le Jayenge, or the one SC/ST guy in Lagan playing cricket and all that stuff. That's for Indian audience. But hands down, I have not found anything better than India Untouched to show to American audience and to just wake them up to the reality of what India is.
Uh, I mean, I agree, but I agree with Siddharth. Like as a movie, so I'm talking about like this is not only about the movie. We are talking about the system which has been going on for centuries, right? Now this movie has been made in last 10 years or maybe in 15 years. Now there is a literature. There is a abundance of anti-caste literature which has been available there for at least 7 decades, you know, which is theoretically sound and which is explicit in its political standpoints and everything. Now, the thing is that why it doesn't reach there, why it is not translated for the world. And I mean, this is a whole different politics. As a movie, I can understand, like it's a powerful documentary. It's as explicit, as naked as it can get. So as a movie, yeah, it's a powerful documentary, and for other people to understand about the very darkest side of India. But introduction is not on. It's not enough. We need an education. And this education could have happened, like if text, we are talking about the visual, right? The movie is visual. There is text, and text has been produced. It has been produced for last 70 years across India. Anti-caste text. Why it has not been? I mean, of course, like I think it is also related to what we are discussing today. So it is not off the track, I guess. So I mean, this movie is just a trigger point. Like we should discuss the various aspects of it. So we need to think about a lot of like why things don't happen the way they happen, like or they should have been happened.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing, and I think these are really important points. And something that you said takes me to the next part of it, Yogesh. You have written tremendously on the issues faced by the Dalit community. Through a wide range of analysis of movies with Dalit characters, like you were speaking about DDLJ right now. Of attempts to demand Hindi as a national language of India, and lives and experiences of other Dalit activists, and so on. And it just makes me wonder what is driving Yogesh. To write and to make so many pens write. You have Panthers Paw Publications that you founded. So it's it's it, it's really interesting to see the fierceness with which you have this push to write and share what other people are writing with the world. And before I dive more into it, I would like to start by sharing a poem that you wrote. It's called Dilemma, if that's okay. um, My father sang to me in a language his father taught him. Hence, in it, his rage had clarity. His love was sublime. But I grew up much greedy. I wrote in English and kept on writing. Later, father's words turned voiceless to me, and I turned deaf to his song. I grew mean. Today, I imagine if I have a son or a daughter, what song shall I sing to them? Precisely, in what language shall I sing? Like when I read this poem, I see that somewhere you're struggling with how your relationship was with your father and also with the language itself, right? So can you share a bit about your relationship with your father, and why is there so much, there's this sense of discomfort and struggle with language itself for you?
uh, like as I mentioned there, like if I was not if I did not make a choice to write in this language or to be engaged with this language, so I wouldn't be here talking to you guys. I mean, that's very much apparent. Uh, uh, with my father, like like he's a different a person who is like not even like I won't say like he's a different generation, but he's a whole together. He belonged to a different world. I mean, so my community like we have converted to Buddhism in 1956. So you guys must have like you have some awareness about this conversion, Ambedkar's conversion. So, and I'm from Nagpur. So the place is just 3-4 kilometers from here. So my father was like 3 years old, when that happened. So he went with his father, and then like that whole that historical event took place. Uh, he don't he doesn't consider himself as a even Buddhist or Dalit. I mean, he doesn't go with this vocabularies. He's a very old kind of a man. For him, he's still a Mahar. His identity for him is a Mahar. The Buddha for him is like a kind of a like we replace Hinduism, like so for him Buddha is like kind of a godly figure, but he's a total atheist. Like he doesn't do anything, nor my mother. Like they both are like they don't follow all these things. Like so his life is very demanding in terms of survival. And I'm a like millennial. Like I like he my father introduced me to the world of theater, movies, very early, like when I was like some 2-3 years old. So I was like like I grew up with movies, like more than text. So I started reading very late in my life. And like I mean that poem is like it's a whole lot of a discourse, like it since it is emotional. So I'm not able to comment on it, like because I it needs time to go back to your stories, your world, those moments. But I think basically this poem is also about the language question. So for me, what I want to write or what I can't help but writing it like it's about like how I see. It's a perspective, right? Like if both of us are looking at the same thing, I might see it differently, and that difference, that perception is because of not because the caste in which I born, but the kind of consciousness I reached up to, as in uh, I know my roots, and when you know your roots, right, you are the center of everything. So I am the center of what I do, and I am the center of the world. So I no longer see the world through the white perspective, even through the black perspective, even through the perspective of Brahmins, even the OBCs, even the Shudras. So for me, I am the center of the world. I see and I imagine and I write. So I think this is reaching to the, in history who you are. Now, again, if you're talking about the roots, so Ambedkar has theories like poor Mahas, they were, so his theory says that they were Buddhists, so, and why they made untouchables, like, why there were only four varnas, and in every varna there were several jatis, several castes, but why they felt, why Brahmins felt need to make few people untouchable, like the that cruelty. What makes Brahmin to be so cruel? It can only be explained that when you can't win your enemy by any means of power, so invisibilize that person, you know make that person a silence which nobody can talk about it. So when Ambedkar says like we were Buddhists, which means that like we were not ready to give up the the rationality in life, or the logic, which so many people have already given up, in terms of like accepting superiority and inferiority, because Brahmins are top, they are superior for everybody, superior to everybody. So people in the middle, they sometimes feel really good by looking down. So that superiority complex they can have, so with which they maintain caste system. But for us, like, you know uh, I think the person who is the most pressurized is the person who can blow up the system. So that happened in 1956. So I think that's a rough explanation to, or the historical explanation to the poem from which I mean the background from which that poem has emerged.
Thank you, Yogesh. I think that's quite insightful to know, and especially from the space of personal experience. And Suman, I would like to move a bit towards you and switch gears here a bit. So as a person, we have many identities, and there are privileges and challenges that are associated with each of these identities. Now, for example, sorry, can everyone else please put yourself on mute? Yeah. Thank you. So now, for example, being a man is different than being a woman. Being a cis straight person is different than being queer. Being an upper caste person is different from being Dalit and the lower caste that exists. So you, Suman, you're a person who carry a lot of identities that are not privileged. When we see in the Indian context, you are a queer Dalit woman. So my first question to you is, which is the first identity that you started becoming conscious about when you were growing up?
Oh, my caste identity for sure. Um, I have been fortunate enough to be born into a family where my parents were fairly liberal and haven't treated me differently from my brother, I mean, in most cases. However, one of my early memories as a kid is going to fetch water with my masis, I mean, my mother's sister, to the nearby hand pump, which was a common hand pump in the village back then. And I think even now, I was back then I was strictly asked to stand away from other women who had to come there to fetch water. I was asked not to touch their vessels. If I accidentally touch it, they would yell, throw the water away, clean the vessel, and then fill it up again. And I never questioned it. It was just something everyone asked me to do, and I followed it. Um, so there was a clear demarcation with a wall between ours and the upper caste area in the village. We were not allowed to go there. Later, it was kind of relaxed, but where we could go there, but not enter any houses that were there. And we could talk to them, we could say hi, laugh with them, but we were not allowed to touch. Um, and I remember in school, the way I looked, the way I talked was always a laughing stock. Back then in school, when I had a darker skin tone, I remember one of my friend who visited my house constantly. He he talked about how dark I was uh, because my parents could not afford an air conditioner. All these comments and all these like smaller things, they do find a root in casteism, I believe, directly or indirectly. That is something that I didn't realize back then, but I do now. And in a lot of spaces, I've always said that there are, if you ask me to describe myself in 3 words, I would always choose Dalit queer woman. And if you ask me to remove all the other identities and keep just talk about one, I would choose my Dalit identity, because I believe everything that I experience in the world, whatever I've experienced till now, whatever I'm going to experience ahead in my life, I think all of it kind of derives from this one identity of mine. Everything that I will experience in this world will come from this one identity of mine. So I would say I was aware of my caste identity ever since I was a kid. It was only later that I started understanding gender based discrimination and understanding discrimination based on sexual identity, which came much later in my life. So I think my caste identity would be something that I was always really aware about, even without having been explicitly told about what exactly caste is.
There is this interesting thing about facing discrimination on certain basis. Like you shared, that's how you've seen people do it. So it is normalized, right? And then there is a point when you question it, when you're like, no, this has to change. This is not okay. So I'm just curious, like, what was that moment for you, or when did you start like realizing and be like, hey, this is not okay, and I need to stand up against this, or this needs to change?
Um, Sadly, it was much later in my life. I think I would say after I finished my law school. I always had a lot of mental health issues because of whatever I've seen and whatever I've faced. I had a lot of mental health issues, and I could never muster up the courage to basically stand up and say that, hey, this is wrong, because it was very difficult. Even when I was in my household, whenever we never really talked about caste, but whenever we would have a discussion about, oh, something that is happening in school that I'm bothered about, the thing that I would be told is like, ignore it, remove it, don't. Even I remember, like, even in my school, if when the teachers, I think during the board exams, when I had to fill a form and write my caste identity there was a huge discussion in my house where my mom and dad, they basically sat down and they were like, oh, do you have to submit this in school? This has to be public. And there were a lot of discussion about it. That kind of like pushed me to internalize that this is something that I shouldn't be talking about. I shouldn't, and this is something wrong. And because of that, it took me a really long time to actually understand that if I keep shutting myself down, if I don't stand up to whatever is happening around me, this will continue. But even then, it took me really long time to muster up the courage to basically first time like stand up and say that, hey, this is wrong. To say that, to have that, now I say like entitlement to say that what you're saying is wrong, it came much later in my life. I was a very timid, intimidated person. Uh, so yeah, it took a really long time for me.
Thank you for sharing that, Suman. And I think um if I put it a bit bluntly, it's difficult for me to understand the complete nuances of coming from the Dalit community, because I do not belong to that community. But belonging to the queer community, I've had my share of experiences of discrimination. And when we talk about the subtle ways in which it affects you and how much time it takes for you to just stand up and speak about it, I think I completely understand what kind of amount and effort it may take for a person to do that. So thank you for sharing that. And Yogesh, with that, I would again like to shift gears a bit and move back to you. So you you went ahead about opening the Panthers Paw publication, and I've read and seen a bit about it, and it looks like a great place for giving platform to the lit writers, the content around that, and share it with the wider world. So just so you know, why did you feel like it was the right thing to do? Though I know you briefly touched upon it, but if you can expand a bit more, and what is your vision for it really?
It is a necessity, if we have to live as in history, you need to produce your stories, right? And if you don't produce your stories, nobody is going to do that for you. Now, the kind of stories I want to write, I may not get a publisher for 10 years. So that doesn't mean that I'm going to sit there and wait for the publisher, right? So that was the one thing. And also because I have seen, like when I was studying literature, so I took up one course in English literature, and then I read, all these Savarna writers, like hailed by the world, big writers, big critics, there are so many, praises they used to get on their covers in discussion, and they used to be intellectual, so-called intellectuals. If you remember the world in which we lived 10 years ago, like, only Savarna writers were the intellectual, right? I mean, they were called for discussion on, even on the caste. Now, why it is happening now, like even today, like why it is happening, why I'm called, like, why? Because I have a platform to speak my thoughts the way, uncensored. Okay. So that censorship, I don't want that. Representation given, I don't want. I can represent myself, and I will do that. That is another thing. Censorship is something like which should not be there, because my stories are not something according to the Savarna taste. So this publisher may not find it useful, like, this is the Brahminical capitalist system. So either it should be a Brahminical story, so that it can be sold out, or it should be a story which is interesting, which should have a sellability. No, my stories have none, right? Neither it is Brahminical, nor it is like, according to the popular taste or aesthetics. So what would I do? Should I not write? I should write, and I will. But when it comes to, like, you write, that is one thing. How you are going to bring out that in front of the world, that's a pragmatic question. And then I thought about it, and I thought, there is no other option other than publishing our own text. So with that vision, I, started Panthers for publication in 2016. And yeah, I mean, that's a one motive behind starting it. And I mean, I can now, it's a kind of a freedom, right? You are not dependent. So once that dependency mode has gone, you understand what freedom is, and with the freedom it comes responsibility. So it is Panthers Paw is about, providing platform to, Dalit Bahujan writers, women writers, so that the voices which are not heard can, given a platform. So, that's a objective of it. So we are slowly moving, slowly going on the path we decided. So earlier, not many people know about it, but slowly people started to recognize it, and a lot of people also offer volunteer help, like in terms of editing or designing, or finding platforms to distribute books and all. So it's a kind of a movement, like even I always mention that Panthers Paw is not a publication, it's a movement. It's a movement, it's a literary aspect of the movement, larger Dalit anti-caste movement. So I mean, those who identify themselves as anti-caste consciously are part of it.
Yeah. Um, and Suma, now, like, going back to you, with another question, right? You spoke about how the Dalit identities is really has been really close to you because of, especially your very early growing up years, and the amount of different experiences that you've had, whether they are subtle or more blatant. But now you also identify as queer, so what does it mean to be queer to you? Like, I read one of the posts in the Lit Queer project, where you were quoting that, how the thought of understanding your sexuality came much later in your life. So what did it feel like looking at this completely different side of yourself, that you were exploring as a Dalit person in a country where, being queer is still a taboo?
Um, yes, I think it's a big privilege. I had the option to. I think the option that I had to not think about my sexuality. I believe it's a privilege. A lot of people from the community, they do not have that privilege. Having said that, I always felt this sense of guilt whenever I would think about my sexuality. I would feel that there are, basically, there are like much bigger issues that my community is going through right now. How dare I even spend time thinking about my sexuality? Uh, it took me a lot of time to understand that each identity of mine is equally important and valued, and there should be no guilt about me wanting to understand it or explore it. Um, Even before I admitted to myself that I was queer, I was always extremely vocal about LGBT, right? But yes, I was scared to come out, or admit it. It was always difficult because, especially because I think in the LGBT movement, I hardly saw people like me, people from my community in leadership positions. It was difficult for me to relate. Whenever and whatever I learned, explore, it was all on my own. And now, when I see people from the community, speaking up, I see their resilience. It fills. It basically fills me with a lot of pride. But for the teenage me, I think the teenager me was, I wish I had someone to hold my hand and tell me, like, hey, you're not alone. That's why I think the queer movement right now, it needs to keep people from the marginalized communities at the core and forefront of it. Um, and for me, because I didn't have that representation right in front of me, where people I could see and say that, hey, I relate to this person. I relate to this person's experience as a Dalit queer person. I relate to this person as a Dalit queer woman. When I didn't see that in the community while growing up. And I think that was one of the major reason why it took me a lot of time to be comfortable, even like to think about exploring my sexuality without feeling guilty about doing it. So I think there is like a bigger that it needs we need to have like a bigger conversation about within these movements, all these movements, feminist movement, even the Dalit movement, queer movement, who are we exactly keeping at the core of it, and how does it affect the people who are looking at it from outside? uh, are there enough people, especially from people who haven't had the opportunity to come up and speak up and be at the core of these movements, and instead of leading these movements, people who have had the privilege of having that visibility always leading these movements, I think it's high time that we start thinking about having people from marginalized communities at the core of it. That is the only thing that I feel like if I had it back then. There were a lot of people, definitely, but the visibility, where does the visibility lies? On whom does the visibility lie? I wish if I had it back then, it would have been much, much easier for me to be okay with who I was and just feel comfortable with it.
Yeah, and I see that you've been associated with many organizations working on different aspects, whether it is feminism in India, Dalit Women Fight. You're currently working with Jhatka as campaign manager for gender and sexuality. And when you say all of this, I can kind of see and join the dots and be like, yes, it makes total sense for you to be in those spaces and trying to create a change. And I really applaud and appreciate you for being out there. And I can see how it'll be a inspiration and encouragement for so many people who might be in the same shoes as you were a couple of years back. So yeah. um, I'll keep on having more and more questions, but I think it is also time to open up to take questions from audiences. So Siddharth, you have a question there, and instead of saying it myself, I would encourage you to ask the question directly.
Sure, absolutely. Yogesh, Suman, we look up to you back in India as leaders of the movement back in India, and we are trying to do the same here in the US. So my question for you is, as leaders of the movement back in India, what would you want us here outside in America or rest of the world to focus on and do so that it propels the movement back in India? What one or two things should we focus on here in terms of reaching out to Americans or creating an international opinion or whatever? So that's my question. What would you want us to focus on here?
Suman, you want to answer?
I would say that since for people who have had the opportunity to be outside India and still engage with these issues, I think it becomes more and more important for you to, uh, uh, going by what Baba Sahib had said, organize especially. I've seen a lot of times, and this has been a conversation that I've had a lot of time with a lot of people, that um, in the time of needs, when um, the conversation about caste and caste-based violence and atrocities, it usually comes up within the country and outside the country when there is a movement of extreme brutality that has happened. For example, the Hathras case that recently happened. We see conversation about caste only when something like this happens. But I really feel that to actually think about annihilating caste from the society, it is not a one-off conversation that starts and ends with a trend. So it shouldn't be dependent on that. So you being outside and we being inside, it doesn't really matter. The conversation about the caste, it needs to like keep going. Identify the spaces and like the everyday casteism in within India and outside India. Speak out about it. I think that identification is really, really important because one of my major problem, as I said, is this: when we relate caste-based atrocities to only a larger caste-based violence that happens and not see it in everyday reality, that engaging with that, even like in your space and organizing people to basically speak about it, talk about it, is extremely, extremely important. A lot of times, like the political environment in the country, we have already seen that uh, it's really bad right now. So especially if you have the opportunity to be outside and speak out about it, be more vocal about it, and amplify the voices that are in the country and that are doing some amazing work on ground, online, everywhere, to amplify those voices, to amplify their work, that becomes really important. So if you want to engage with how do I start a conversation around caste, I would say start with amplifying those voices. There is already a lot of work that is being done on ground by a lot of activists. And I wouldn't say that I'm one of them. I don't consider myself like a leader. I have been doing a lot of work, yes, but I don't think I'm a very small person to be called a leader. But even in my space, I always try to uh, bring the not bring the voice, but amplify the voices that are doing some great work on ground but are not getting the kind of attention that their work needs to. So I think familiarize yourself with the work that these activists are doing, not just the ones that already have the attention that mainstream media speaks about, but also the ones who are working in smaller organizations, working in smaller villages and smaller spaces. Familiarize yourself with the work and then amplify those work. I think that would be one of the most important thing to do when, if you want to start a conversation around caste. These voices needs to come out, the work that they are doing needs to come out. We need to understand the reality about caste that is there in India. I mean, I think the first thing that you said, Siddharth, in the beginning about how this movie is like a 101 for American audience to familiarize themselves with how caste works in India. That is like, I completely understand why you're saying that, but the problem is that we shouldn't need this movie, you know. Caste has been in India and it has been present in India for thousands and thousands of years, and now if we say that a movie that has come in, I think, like the last 10 years, that movie is a 101 on talking about how caste works in India, that itself is a very sad reality, right? And people who are working in the community, they have been working for such a long time and they're doing such amazing work. And I'm just, it makes me sad that that work is not recognized and doesn't get the kind of recognition that it needs to get from mainstream media, from people from the community even. So I think the starting step would be to amplify those work. Once this work that they are doing, the kind of work that they are doing, if that becomes an everyday conversation, that in itself will bring and highlight the caste-based atrocities that is happening within the country, and a conversation around that would be, it would be much easier to start a conversation about it outside. Samya, you're on mute.
Thank you for responding to that, Suman. I think that's very well put, and it helps us understand better, and you know, hopefully we'll collaborate more in the future to, you know, learn about your work as well as of other people who are working on the ground, and see how best we can amplify these voices. Yogesh, do you want to add to that response?
I basically, like, I believe on, like, uh, I'm not a visionary. Like, I don't have a vision, like, to bring these things or changes what we should do. Like, I'm like, I focus on small things, and I, put everything into that. So I'm that kind of a person. But like, what Siddharth asked is like, it's a question is which is always there, right? We all are like somewhere working towards, like, towards imagining, or like, want to see the society which is not as dark as what we are seeing. Like, we want to see the society which is not casteist, which is not racist. But when we see we don't want this, what do we want, right? I mean, we are clear that we don't want a casteist and the racist society. We don't want a society which discriminates people on their, choices in sexuality, or on their genders, or on their linguistic backgrounds, and any kind of identities. People people choose to live with that. So we don't want a society which discriminates people because they don't consent to the norms of the society which has a majority in the, major, which has this major stakes in the society. So when we say that we don't want this, what do we want? Like, Ambedkar said that, like, it's a Prabhu, like he wants to create India as a Prabuddha Bharat. So when he said like Prabuddha means, not exactly the Buddhist India, but it's like enlightened India. And when he say enlightened, he said that he meant that we need a society which, at least in its social life, practice a, a, a sense of equality, a liberty, fraternity, justice, at least in their social spaces, right? So he was very clear, like what he wanted. Now, in order to have that, like what do we do? Now, one of the reasons when upper caste or the liberals, they don't really understand that change comes through violence, and that can be any kind of violence. Now, a Dalit who is an anti-caste activist, she has to, or they have to face the violence when they try to do something which is democratic and anti-caste. Now, if the liberal Savarna Brahmin wants to do the same thing, she doesn't, or they don't face the violence. Why? Because they are not doing at the right space. Now, Savarna themselves have a caste, so they can think about it, they can educate themselves, and they should start from their families. I mean, at least they can do. They can't bring revolution, and I can't bring revolution. Nobody can bring any revolution, and that time has gone. We have lot of theories about which talks about liberation, emancipation. There are ideas of new world. There is idea of utopia. We have a whole lot of things what we want. Why we are not doing it? Some people are doing it because they 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 don't have a choice. Some people who try to be liberal revolutionary, for them this is a choice because they are privileged. Now, unless and until they work among their community, which is a privileged community, there is no change. And in order to do that, you need to understand the emotional world of the people who are, oppressed. So, again, like I come to the, because I was also, not very much aware about the outside world, and it was a limitation for me. So I was introduced to the outside world through literature. Now, initially in English literature, I tell you one thing, whatever text I was given or suggested and all this, like I had a Brahmin professor and all, so they suggested me the only the the specifically white writers. When I started exploring, like and I started, so my idea about America has changed, radically changed. Like, I haven't seen this America. Like, I have seen black people's, like the some characters, like extra characters or side characters coming in the white movies. Like, and I used to watch those movies. Like, but they were just side characters, but they have also different whole together emotional, their own world, their ideas of the world. So unless and until I am aware about the emotional world of oppressed person, or this community, I'm not going to educate myself, and nor I'm going to educate anybody. And if I am not going to educate myself and my community, like I won't be able to do anything for anybody. So, reading more Dalit literature.
Thank you, Yogesh. We have the next question from Suniti. Suniti, can you unmute yourself and yeah.
Yeah. So, Yogesh, thank you very much for that very authentic and inspiring, you know, recount of, narration. And it is so important what you said about, the stakeholders. Right now, the stakeholders are about 12% of the population, and they claim to represent the 100% of the population, whereas the 88% of the population, no one knows their emotional world, their lived reality. And so congratulations, heartiest congratulations on starting with this initiative. I mean, I think it is something that will really make India a proper representative India. Right now it's just a fraction, a small slice of India that is presented to the world as the whole of India. And that is a lie. And you've taken on the noble task of, and the very difficult task, with all the resistance that it brings, of of undoing that injustice and that misinformation that we we assume is the whole big picture. So thank you very much for doing that. My question was initially, I think you already answered a lot of it in what you just said, but my question was, now that you have created this avenue through which Dalit leaders can share their stories, what are the stories that are now coming up that were previously disregarded? Is there anything you sense there? Like, is there a difference that you notice?
Yeah. See, in India, the field of publication, or let us say the literary politics, is Brahminical and capitalist. So let me tell you, like, how it is Brahminical and capitalist. Look, they are aesthetically Brahminical, like, and their tastes are Brahminical, like the kind of story they choose and publish majorly are Brahminical or supportive to their, like, stream of consciousness, like, they should like it, so then only will publish, because they own the means of production, they own these publications. Now they are capitalists also because they publish some Dalit literature. Now, what Dalit literature they publish is, they publish a Dalit author who is very senior, and now who has a readership, one, which means if she has a readership, which means they have a market, and they have a market to sell, and they have market to earn, right? Now they don't publish new Dalit voice, they don't publish young Dalit voice, because they really don't want them to have a life, to a career in which they can thrive, in which they can become a solid writer, so I mean, that is one of the reasons, like, when I thought that, like, there should be a publication and we should do something about it. So it's like, giving uh platform to the young voices, the people who are writing currently. So I mean, there are some publications in India who publish, like, translated some Dalit writers, but the writers whom they have translated right now are dead for at least 10 years. So which means that the whole royalty thing is, again going back to the publishers, the Savarna publishers, and they just are, thriving on the name and the, that prestige of the Dalit writer, you know so it is like, like, it's a very smart system, but very cunning, it's very cunning. So and the publishing in India is like, it's very uh, depressing industry. So uh, I mean, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Yogesh and Sunita. So, can everyone else please put themselves on mute? Yeah, I think that was a great question, and it's the more we are hearing, I think we recognize the reason why there is a need of a publication where we don't have someone censoring the content. It's so important to have a direct face to bring out these narratives and voices. And before I move to the question that Bilal has, I know Ankita Apurva wrote something on the chat. Ankita, like, I welcome you to kind of share what you wrote with everyone and talk about it. I think it's very important to speak about it as well. Okay, I think I'm happy to read it for Ankita. And Ankita, please feel free to. Oh, she has some background noise, so I'll just read what she wrote in the chat. Like, in day-to-day lives, being a Bahujan comes with multiple layers of consequent trauma. Being a Bahujan, we face caste-based trauma. Then even the onus of proving the trauma is put on us by the upper caste lens. And then even after laboring to prove, the upper caste erases or trivializes our pedestalize us, and worst of all, put the trauma of teaching everything to them on us. So that is putting the responsibility of corrective action or reform on the oppressed. So how do we deal with these layers of trauma? Um, I think it's such a strong and such an apt point that you've made there, Ankita. And Suman, Yogesh, do either of you want to respond to that or add to it?
Suman, you want to respond to that? Uh,
Sure. Yeah. To be honest, this is something that even I am still struggling with. Like, how do you answer this question? Because on one part, you feel like you have been given this opportunity of having a platform where, or having access to platforms where you can speak about what you have went through and what has happened in your life, and bring the kind of bring your lived experiences forward. um, and I you feel very fortunate about doing that and having that opportunity. And on the other hand, it brings a lot of mental pressure and labor on your part, because and every single time you have to do it, right? And what is what bothers me a lot is that when we see people from the upper caste community speak about a certain issue, it's always that one person speaking about that issue. But when a person from Dalit community and the marginalized community speaks about certain issue, it suddenly becomes the voice of the entire community. And that in itself, it brings a lot of pressure on a person, right? You have that responsibility on you of suddenly, because people feel like you're representing the community somehow, and I don't see that representation happening in upper caste community when a person from those communities come and speaks. So that kind of brings again a lot of uh, labor on your part and a lot of mental pressure. Ankita, I don't know how to answer that question, but what I've learned now, like after so many years, when I talk to my sisters in the community, um, I've realized that having that urge to prove yourself to the upper caste community is in itself coming from a place of the upper caste community is having that hold or the power upon our identities. And I'm refraining from doing that for quite some time now. I don't do that. I don't answer to their questions because I don't owe that to them. My experiences, whatever I've experienced, is not for them to evaluate or analyze. And that is something that we really need to remember. Yes, there are moments when we have to speak up, when we have to speak about what has happened to us or what we have experienced in our life. But that should be for yourself. It shouldn't be for anyone else. That shouldn't be your explanation to someone else. You don't owe that to them. You don't owe that to them. And a lot of times I feel like having this pressure of every single time there was an organization that I used to work with, and every single time there was an opportunity to speak about a certain issue, the organization would ask me to basically go ahead, like speak on issues of caste or atrocity. They would ask me to, hey, can you just go and speak up? I feel like that is extremely wrong to do. And first of all, like I the if you're putting that labor on the person who is in your organization and you're asking them to go and speak up about a certain issue, if they do not even want to do that, it kind of brings again like a lot of pressure on you, and then you have to kind of conform to that. So what I've realized is whenever I'm feeling burden or I feel like that's a lot of labor on my part that I'm asked to do, I take a step back, I shut everything down, and then I don't do that. I don't go and basically engage with that issue. I believe that when I am gone, my sisters are there to hold the fort for me. And I don't have to be there on the battleground every single time when something is happening. My sisters are there holding the fort. So just have that trust in your community and your sisters. And uh, if you feel like you're being pressurized in a situation to speak up, 99% of the time, don't do it. That is my rule. I don't do that. If I feel like I'm put in a position where I have to speak, I don't speak up. Whenever you want to speak, it should be for yourself and yourself only, and not for anyone else. So that is something that I have been following now. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Suman, and thank you for bringing that question up, Ankita. I think this is such an important part to discuss and talk about. And there are a part of people who do feel that pressure, on what to do about it, and it's it's definitely something that one needs to learn about. And I think more so for the people who probably do not belong from the community, to kind of introspect and learn what exactly they're doing and asking for. So thank you for sharing that. Bilal, would you like to ask your question next?
Sure. Thank you so much for all the respected speakers. I had a question. So today, like as we're on this panel, things have dramatically changed, or hopefully seem to change in U.S. politics. My question is to the respected panelists: what can we do as South Asians living in diaspora to help the cause in our motherland, quote unquote, not in the Sungi sense of a motherland, but back home? What can we do? What type of, any tips on coalition building, any types of pointers? Indian Americans in general, that whole community space is very upper caste, or it's very Brahmanical dominant, and they have, as many of you probably already know, they have like a whole revisionist effort to kind of whitewash Indian history or caste oppression, as well as Islamophobic oppression in the Western lens and the American lens. So what would be some of your pointers? How can we kind of politically build solidarity to assist the movement back home?
Bilal, I think that is a great question, and I think this whole idea of how we can support the ongoing work in India, and how it can be more synchronized effort was the most effective thing. We did have a question about this a while back, and
Okay.
yeah, so may I request you that we are making a recording of it, and in
Sure.
the interest of time, and not making people repeat, we're happy to share
No
those.
worries. Perfectly fine. Yeah.
But what makes me happy is that more and more people are trying to think about it, and being more aware and conscious about it, on how to what is the best thing to do. And probably we here sitting here don't know the best responses to it, so engaging with people who are actually there in India and doing this work are the best sources for us to understand it. So thank you.
Thank you for thank you, and sorry if I asked a redundant question.
Of course, no worries. So Miraj is going to go with the next question, and in the interest of time, and it's also pretty late in India, we will take one more question after that, and after that, Siddharth here has one or two announcements to make, which we will give space for. But of course, giving some closure to the panelists before that. So Miraj, please go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. Before that, I would really like to say something here which really resonated with me, and I put that in the text, is that when you speak something, how it becomes the voice of the community and not your individual voice, and it's really sometimes it puts a lot of pressure on you on things that you're saying. But my question was that, and I feel that when I am discussing some issues, contemporary issues in a predominantly Muslim environment, there's a different kind of situation there when I'm talking. And when I'm talking in an environment which is not predominantly Muslim, it's predominantly non-Muslim, and I'm kind of then becomes this voice of somehow speaking about for Muslims, So how does that? And I feel that difference when I do that talk. So I wanted to have a kind of a perspective on, as a Dalit Bahujan community, when you are speaking and you're communicating in a predominantly Bahujan platform, which is organized by Bahujans, which is for the Bahujans, and we non-Bahujans go as on that, like to learn. And when you are invited on a platform by something like this, for example, like we have organized this and we have invited you to come and talk about that, do you also feel the difference, and what is that difference that you feel? And this question is for both the Suman and Yogesh.
Miraj, I think there was some, like I missed something, like because of some voice. I had some difficulty in listening to that. Like, but if I'm understanding it correctly, like you said that, I mean, it's about like how do we you know how do you address things from the Dalit Bahujan perspective, right? Is that what you asked?
My internet is really patchy today, so I'm sorry for that. So what I wanted to say is that in my personal experience, when I go and talk in a predominantly Muslim platform, it's a different thing that we are talking, because a lot of people understand the trauma, the problems, everything that they're coming from, experience. So you share that. And when you go to a platform which is not predominantly non-Muslim, and you are invited to talk there, like if I put it for how it is for you, is that when you are going in a Bahujan Dalit community organized by Bahujan Dalit people, and we go, you are invited by something which is organized by us,
Miraj,
like Savarna, when you come and talk. So is there a
sorry, Miraj, can I just jump in there? Your voice really chopped
sure?
off. What I
Oh,
is
okay, I'm really sorry for that.
if you can
So
type,
Soumya,
and
if you understand, can you just please put this question?
I'm a little
Yeah,
confused. Sorry.
Okay,
I think
I'm sorry, guys. So you can just
But
go ahead.
okay, wants to respond anyway. So yeah, let's see.
I think for an example, what he's saying is like, if I'm a Dalit and then I'm going to the platform which is predominantly not Dalit, but I have to talk about the issues, right? So how do I deal with that? Is that what you meant to say, right, Miraj? I mean,
Yeah, the difference between speaking in a predominantly non-Dalit platform and speaking on a predominantly Dalit platform.
okay. So I mean, in nutshell, I got it. Like, you know, so I think I cannot, it is like, like, see, the the let me put it a little metaphorically, right? uh, One person has a problem, right? Like he has some injuries, some wounds, right? And so, but I am telling another person how to take care of that wound, right? So it is like I'm telling a wrong person. Now, if I'm talking about the Dalit issues among Dalit, doesn't make any sense. They know that. They have their own modus operandi about how to deal with that. So the problem of caste is not down; it is up. So so it is always there. It has started from there. It is dripping from up to down, right? So if I'm like why there are no substantial changes, we are seeing that we are working among wrong people. Like, everybody comes and work, try to work among Dalit community about the caste, as if they are killing, raping, oppressing other people. So they are the victims of it. They are the repercussions of it. Like, I mean, they are the other end of it. Like, so when you say, like, because I'm also like extending the question you are saying, because why do we need to, why as a Dalit I need to speak among non-Dalits, and what do I speak with Dalits about the same topic? So for me, like, talking about the caste discrimination among Dalits is like, I can be, I mean, I don't know, like, uh, how does it sound, but like, uh, we need to change the platforms if we want to bring the changes. Like, we need to work with the root cause of it and the where it lies. So like, let us say, like, if Muslim community is facing problems, like, but who is the originator of it? you know they are not facing problem from, like, the problems which are coming from nowhere, right? I mean, but this is the discourse across the world. The discourse of oppression is always talked and centered among oppressed. Nobody talks about the oppressor. nobody invites him to listen. Nobody goes into. I mean, it is it's unimaginable to go to them. But I mean, of course, it is not in their interest also to come here. But we are just like doing things in a wrong way. When you talk about changes, when you talk about everything, I think most of them we are doing things in a wrong way. I mean, the problem is somewhere, but we are treating it somewhere.
May I add a small thing over here, if it's okay?
Please do.
Yeah. So to Mehraj's question, as a Dalit leader, when I am invited to Bahujan Brahminical platforms, I try to categorize how many times and how much time I spend there versus how much time I spend on my own platform, which I'm building. If my speaking engagements and my approach to telling if my only recourse to sharing the Dalit narrative is a Brahmin platform, then I'm utterly failing as a Dalit leader. It needs to be 90% my own platforms that my community builds, and at most 10% for them. It also goes into the same thing, like I shouldn't need their platform to tell my story, because then even though they're giving me a platform, they can snatch it away from me, or they can put boundaries around it saying that, yeah, speak about the caste system, but please don't bring religion in it. Or yeah, please talk about caste system, but they try to decide and say, but it is all white audience, by the way, so can you tame it a little, or can you not say, like, are you giving me the platform or are you not giving me the platform? Are you just having me as a token representative? So as a leader, when I step in, I assess myself. If all my speaking engagements are on Brahmin platform, then I should step back and actually start building my own platform. So that's what I would suggest.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's such an important perspective. And it makes me think, as well, like, why are we not going to say the oppressors and questioning them? Hey, why do you have this problem in how you're set up? How are you challenging it? Why is there no pressure or onus on their part to take charge of it, as much as for people to kind of, who are at the receiving end of it, who are suffering because of it, to kind of always make the movement and educate people and everything. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I would quickly just Prerna here message, and Yogesh, she's offering that in case you need volunteers for the design work or for your publication, she's happy to connect and offer that. And I cannot thank the two of you enough. It's been 1 hour or so, but so useful. So not just for people who do not understand these issues, but even for people who know these issues, who understand it, and who are here and can find resonance. So yeah, thank you so much for finding time. Really appreciate. Is there anything that either of you want to add before we close this discussion today?
Let's keep in touch. Like, I mean, I guess, things work out in a long run, like, right? So, yeah.
Thank you for having me here. I think listening to Yogesh was a great pleasure because it got me thinking about a lot of things. So I think thank you so much for inviting me here. This was great opportunity to not just speak but also learn a lot. So thank you, Yogesh, for that, and Siddharth as well. Thank you so much, and thanks Soumya for organizing this.
It was interesting. We were actually setting up the screening without having a panel discussion, and Siddharth brought up this point of, hey, it makes a lot of sense to have the panel discussion. And now that we've set it up, I can clearly see why. So thank you so much for even raising a concern with that.
May I announce?
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So these are very related. First thing, I want to appreciate the group for taking my feedback and actually putting in a panel, because otherwise I didn't want it to be a upper caste Ashraf popcorn movie watching party with no context. So that's why I wanted to ask to have Bahujan panelists. So I'm so glad that you actually picked that suggestion up. So thank you. More importantly, I wanted to bring up 2 announcements. The first announcement is an author's lab. rightfully, as Yogesh said, there is not much space where Bahujan authors can write or publish. Some of them may want to write but don't know how to or whatnot. So under Ambedkar International Center, we are having an authors lab. It's going to be a 3-month-long process of requesting submissions, reviewing them, identifying semi-finalists, and finally coming up with 3 finalists whom we will take up under fellowship. Terms are yet to be decided. And the best part about this is that these 3 finalists and also the 10 semi-finalists will get mentoring by already acclaimed publishers from our community. I have Suraj Yangde already on board. And I was actually hoping through this thing to connect with Mimi Mondal, because our authors lab does not distinguish, at least the first year, between fiction and nonfiction. And we want to make it a yearly thing. So later on, we might put more qualification criteria. But at this point in time, Authors Lab is open to all Bahujan authors. We will ask for some specific submission material to determine potential. And then from there, pick 3 finalists who will work for 6 months to a year, depending on the book size and all that stuff. And it can be published under Ambedkar International Center Publishing House, which is out of Maryland. The other thing I wanted to share was that our narrative told by us is very important. So I have a feature script that will be read on December 5th. Some of you have actually attended one of my table reads and heard about it. The title of the feature script is Rachel and Siddhartha. It's about an Indian untouchable who falls for a mixed race girl only to realize that she is half Indian and lives with her Brahmin dad and stepmom, and trying on her own to prove that she's enough Indian. So I am taking this concept of bringing caste as a narrative and dumping it in the middle of America in the Midwest, set in Milwaukee, actually. So I will have information about both of these things on my Instagram at norealindia.com, norealindia. So I just need to find the flyer and everything. I have an issue with making flyers and other stuff too. So I'm not sure if Prerna is also available for others to take help for, but please follow my Instagram and you'll know more information. And Authors Lab would be published on all advertisement, like Awas TV, Lord Buddha TV, Dalit Dastak, Color Board, We the People, and perhaps Yogesh and Suman, if you let me know what other Dalit reaching, Bahujan reaching networks are there, we would publish it there, because we want lots of people to take advantage of it and submit their work.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Siddharth. And Prerna did respond that, yes, please reach out to her. So I guess we are at the closing of a very interesting conversation with some really amazing people out there. So please keep doing what you're doing and stay in touch, and it'll be wonderful to explore how we can work together going forward. Goodbye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.